watching Breakthrough News, and this is the Freedom Side. Happy to be here with you. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Puryear, here as always, alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek. Rania, great to be back alongside you.
It is always a pleasure to be back alongside you, Eugene.
Well, of course, the pleasure is all mine, and we've got a great show lined up for you here today, as we always do. So, good opportunity for you to go ahead and whip out your cell phone, text somebody, call somebody, let them know that the Freedom Side is playing and that they want to tune in. However you contact them, definitely they will thank you for letting them know that this show is happening here today, especially if they've seen it before and know how great it is. And if they know how great this show is, they probably have some idea how great Breakthrough News is, which is a good opportunity to remind those of you watching on YouTube to go ahead and hit subscribe, then hit the bell so you get the alerts for the things that you subscribe to, so you don't have to look or work very hard at all in order to see all of our great content from Breakthrough News, including Dispatches with Rania Khalek. And if you happen to be watching on Free Speech TV, you don't need to do anything else except continue to watch and support Free Speech TV. Big shout out to the FSTV team, as always, for making it possible to appear on that platform for you as well. Rania, are there other things you would like our viewers to know?
Yes, Eugene, there's always some things I'd like our viewers to know. Let's go through them. Are you ready?
Yep, I've got my checklist out.
First and foremost, I want to remind people to make sure you like, subscribe, and share this show. It helps boost us in the algorithm. In other words, smash that like button, folks. I'll come back to you. It's music to my ears. I will come back to you with that in the middle of the show, and depending on how many people have smashed the like button and if it's an appropriate number of people, I will either thank you for smashing the like button or yell at you for not smashing it yet. And other things to go over, I want to remind people that we are an independent media outlet, which means we don't take money from corporations, which means we depend on support from our audience to keep us going and growing. So if you are able to, please do go to patreon.com/breakthrough news, become a member. For as little as $5 a month. You can get access to exclusive content as well as exclusive merch. But most importantly, you can help sustain what I think is a crucial independent media outlet at a moment of a lot of unsettling things taking place under this new administration. Just, capitalism, imperialism, genocide on steroids. So please, if you can, become a member of Breakthrough News, patreon.com/breakthrough news. It is with your support that we can continue to bring you episodes of the Freedom Side Live, of Dispatches, the China Report, the Socialist Program, and amazing documentary feature films like the one we have just released that you can now go see in theaters, at least so far in New York City and soon in LA and hopefully in other places across the country. It's called The Encampments. It's incredibly important, produced by Breakthrough News, by Watermelon Pictures. Executive producer is Macklemore, who we just did an interview with and who you're going to see us speak to on this show today. It's super important. It's about the Columbia encampments, about the repression towards them. Mahmoud Khalil is featured prominently in this documentary. So go to, I believe it's called the-encampments.com. Yes. Where you can find showings and purchase tickets.
You've covered it all. Very important, and I think it's been fantastic to see the enthusiastic, positive reviews. At some of the early screenings for various important people who get to pre-screen. Lots of ovations, very interesting. Also, anyway, long story short, I'm not going to say too much. Just go to the-encampments.com, and we would appreciate everyone who could support us, especially in New York. And if you happen to be going to the New York 715 March 27th showing, I'll actually be there, so we might actually get to meet in person, Breakthrough fans. Nonetheless, let's get this show on the road. With that stated, obviously there's so many things happening in the world. One of the major things is huge protests have been rocking the country of Turkey, where there's been massive arrests and detentions of high-profile politicians, journalists, organizers, and activists of all kinds. But the pushback has been quite significant there in Turkey, and this is an ongoing movement roiling the country. To help us understand what's going on, we are very, very honored to be be joined here by Murat Akkad, member of the Party Council of the Communist Party of Turkey. Murat, thank you so much for being back with us.
Thank you, Eugene. It's great to be with you again.
Well, great to have you here with us, and an issue that I think people need some orientation on for sure. I think a lot of people in the United States have seen a little something about there being large protests in Turkey and a high-profile, prominent politician being arrested. But I mean, give us a sense of what's happening here. Why would President Erdogan be arresting and detaining people, and why has that sparked so much anger in the country?
Okay, maybe we should start with talking about the person you have talked about, the mayor of Istanbul, who was arrested. He was not only the mayor of Istanbul, he was a prominent social democratic politician belonging to the Social Democratic Party, CHP, which is also the main opposition party in Turkey. And apart from that, he was openly becoming, I said, because it was a process, a presidential candidate, and a strong one. He had a lot of support among the public, and opinion polls show that he was in contention for the presidency if there was an election soon. There were just a few points between his votes, expected votes, and President Erdogan's votes. So he was a serious contender for the presidency, and this has caused problems. And actually, there was an inquiry coming. Some journalists and some prominent members of the governing party, AKP, were informing the public about what was going on. A file was being prepared about İmamoğlu, and the inquiry was on the way. And there was an also interesting detail about this process. In order to become a president, or in order to become a candidate for the presidency in Turkey, one has to have a university degree, an undergraduate diploma. And İmamoğlu had his diploma from the University of Istanbul, but he first started his degree in a university in the north part of Cyprus, northern Cyprus. And then he transferred to University of Istanbul. And the inquiry was about this diploma's legitimacy, validation, because at that time, it was the mid-1980s. There were some complications about transfers from the universities in northern Cyprus to the universities in Turkey. But he did that, like many other people did. And so he had a valid diploma for 40 years. And then suddenly, the university started digging into this. And then all of a sudden made a decision that this diploma was invalid. This means that İmamoğlu lost his candidacy. And later that day, next morning, he was also detained along with more than 100 other people, some officials from the municipality, some business people linked with the municipality, doing business with the municipality, and plus some district mayors. Istanbul has also smaller districts, which has their own mayors. So over 100 people were detained. And this triggered the starting of the protests. The inquiry, the interrogations went on for 4 days, and then İmamoğlu and some other people were arrested. And they were charged with two things. One was corruption, and the other was forming a terror organization. But the arrest came from the corruption file. He was released from the terror file. But the protests had already started for those 4 days, and hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets in different places, not only in Istanbul, but in many cities in Turkey. Even in some conservative cities where the people are known to be conservative. This was a surprise for many people. So a wave of protests then followed, which went on for days. They're still ongoing, but the main center was the square called Saraçhane in Turkey, in Istanbul, where the municipality building, the municipality hall, is located. Now we're seeing the demonstrations in front of this municipal hall. But as I said, hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets everywhere. And especially in universities, there were huge protests, which is, I can't say it's unprecedented for Turkey. In the past, we had many protests in universities, but this was the biggest in the universities for a long time. So I can summarize what happened in like that.
I'm curious if you can speak a bit to the fact that with these mass protests, obviously the Communist Party of Turkey has been engaging with this wave of dissent. I'm curious, what role do you see the left playing in this moment of mass mobilization in Turkey?
Well, the left is playing a big role, of course. When I say, of course, hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets, people from many different political thinking went on the streets. But just to go out on the street eventually brings people to the left. That's what we have experienced in the past, not only in Turkey, but in many different countries. So what the left shows to the people, what the left tries to explain to the people, somehow, in the end, will be acquired by at least some of the people. So the left will come along stronger at the end of these protests, I think.
You know, one of the things that I think is relevant, and I know the TKP has been talking about this, is that this isn't, you know, I mean, it is about democracy in the broad sense, but maybe in a slightly deeper sense as well, about the crisis that Turkey is facing in terms of capitalism in that sense, and the inability of the system to really provide, you know, democratic alternatives that are meeting the needs of the people. So I was hoping you could talk about that a little bit as well.
Yeah, what triggered the protests was the detainment of Ekrem İmamoğlu, maybe, but there are many other underlying factors, of course. There are many huge economic problems for the people, not for the capitalists. They're making huge profits, but the people are living through a really difficult time. There's a rapid rise in cost of living. People are having great difficulty. There's poverty is growing, and people are full of anger about this because they see that rich people are getting richer every day, but they are getting poorer. The youth have a lot of worries for the future. They know that even some of them who have the university degree, they will be unemployed very soon, or will have to work in jobs that they don't want to, or will dream about leaving the country and go to maybe somewhere in Europe, in the United States, etc., to find jobs. That's one issue. But not only that, people are really also angry about the state of justice in Turkey. People have lost confidence in the judicial system. They know that what's going on is not just. So one of the main slogans that in these protests was to call for justice. And what caused also some anger among the people was that many renowned people, especially journalists, intellectuals, they have been charged with conspiracy. And people know that they're honest journalists, honest people. So this caused also anger among the people. And on the same day when İmamoğlu and the others were detained, a renowned journalist was detained as well, but he was later released. Well, he's under house arrest, not exactly released. And people are also angry about the anti-democratic measures that the government has been taking. The rights are being suppressed. The right to demonstrate has been suppressed for a long time. The rights for workers, the rights to go on strike is being suppressed. Strikes are being banned or postponed indefinitely. Freedom of press is being suppressed. Freedom of disseminating information is being suppressed. And only today, two big TV channels, social democratic TV channels, I can say, they received punishments from, there's a radio television High Commission, and this commission gave punishments, punished two channels for just showing the protests where the CHP leader spoke. And one was closed, is going to be closed for 10 days. And the other is going to have a smaller punishment, but still it's a punishment. So freedom of press is being suppressed. So all of these are important factors for the people to go out and shout out their anger.
And then, I'm curious when it comes to the way that, as you've just described, Erdogan's government is escalating its crackdown on these democratic freedoms, is, the violent police response, the home raids, the mass arrests, the attacks on media, the suppression of dissent. How do you see the balance of power shifting, I guess, within Turkish society? And what are the prospects for building a broader, unified opposition against the AKP's authoritarian rule? Because I imagine there is quite a bit of opposition, obviously, but it's coming from maybe different political spaces.
Well, at least opinion polls show it clearly that AKP and the government is losing a lot of votes. And they have been in government, as you know, for 23 years now. And for a long time, AKP had its success based on people's confidence. They received a lot of votes, a high percentage of votes in most of the elections that passed in these 23 years. And so they had their legitimacy and the support of the people, at least through the elections. Not only through the elections, but other processes as well. Now, they have started losing that confidence from the people. So it's causing a big problem within the governing party and the governing coalition, I should say, not only AKP, but as you know, there's a coalition in power. So this is fading. That legitimacy on the people's votes is fading. That's an important issue. And this is also causing the ideological and political references keeping this alliance, the governmental alliance together. They're falling apart as well. Many people who call themselves conservatives, Islamist conservative or nationalist conservative, they're leaving ideologically and also in practice the governmental alliance. So that's another issue. And I think that's sort of an answer to your question. Of course, the opposition, the main opposition party, the Social Democratic Party, is gaining more votes, according to the opinion polls. Now they are the first party in the rankings. So, well, for the opposition to form a broad alliance, then you have to have more common, bigger common basis, which is not easy in Turkey.
Murat, in the last couple of minutes before we let you go, I just want to also ask you, I know that a number of TKP members have also been detained and arrested, and you all are facing repression, and many people around the world have been supporting you. Just talk about that a little, if you could, what the TKP itself has been facing.
Yeah, some members of the party were detained, and some of them were arrested. They're in prison right now. The latest figure is eight. 8 members were arrested. Some of them were released, but some of them are still waiting for the decision of the judge. Maybe it's going to be given tomorrow. But TKP has been a part of the protests from the beginning because it thinks it's important that to go out on the street and to call out the reality, what's happening in the country, is important, and to do it in an organized way. We think that the anti-democratic measures I talked about, the rights being suppressed, especially the right to vote, actually. Maybe the most important thing is the right to vote. The right to vote is being suppressed. The right to be elected is being suppressed. At least the İmamoğlu example is showing this. He was elected with a high margin, and all those votes have been gone. There have been previous examples, and trustees were appointed to the place of the mayors who were elected by the people. This is a big problem. This is an assault on the right to vote and right to be elected, I should say. And TKP is finding this important because the right to vote, the universal suffrage, that right was taken by the struggle given for decades, for many years. So it's a really important right. So we think that it's important to defend this right.
Well, we really appreciate you helping us sort through all of this. Murat Akkad, member of the Party Council of the TKP, thank you so much for joining us on the Freedom Side.
Thank you, Eugene. Thank you, Rania.
Rania?
Well, Eugene, it stands to be seen what happens, but man, I mean, maybe if this continues, karma is real.
I
actually,
was
one thing.
thinking the same thing. Erdogan was riding high, but hey.
Yeah. Just when people feel secure, like they're good forever, something like this happens, and so we'll see where it goes. But I mean, I think we should keep that in mind for all these leaders who speak out of both sides of their mouths, and do what Erdogan is doing. There's so many like him. But also, one thing I would have liked to ask, and we'll have to do it the next time we cover this issue, is if any of the sort of foreign policy choices of someone like Erdogan have played into people's sentiments across the country.
Well, we will definitely circle back on that one as well, and very grateful to the TKP for being available on short notice to us. I think we're going to just keep the movement moving on here. We want to turn to another critically important issue, another one kind of like what's happening in Turkey that unfortunately flying under the radar a little bit, and that is Sudan, the ongoing conflict there. Many, many different things happening, and as always, we are honored to be joined by Masab Baba, who is a researcher on Sudan. Masab, thanks so much for joining us again.
Thanks, Eugene. Thanks, Rania. Nice to be with you guys again.
Great to have you with us. A lot of talk going on now. The Sudanese armed forces, one of the factions here, has just, I guess, more or less retaken Khartoum, the historical capital of Sudan, which obviously is a big milestone in many ways. But, I'm sort of seeing two sides of it, Musab, in terms of the conversation. Obviously, some saying this portends maybe sort of the death knell of the RSF, and it'll only be a slide down from here. Other side, I see a lot of people talking about the potential for a frozen conflict in a Libya-type scenario. Where do you think it leaves us now with SAF having taken Khartoum?
So with SAF taking Khartoum right now, I mean, the tide started turning in late last year, where two factors, SAF started getting more support, from Turkey, from Iran. Egypt started becoming a little bit, more active. And on the other hand, the RSF from the beginning was an unsustainable project. The being a militia and relying on rule by fear and ethnic cleansing and stuff like that. So, and also the ethnic outnumbering of the RSF as well was another factor. So what happened, we can't talk about the future scenario without talking about something major that happened recently. Like our comrade Booker from Kenya was talking in one of your previous interviews. Basically, Nairobi hosted a parallel government formation by the RSF. So this is a significant event because it wasn't just the RSF and just small parties around it. It included some heavy hitters, like the SPLM North, and these guys were saying basically, that with SAF coming in and coming back, it's actually the NCP and the Bashir era Islamists that are coming back right now to power, which is actually true. We've seen recently with the celebrations in Khartoum, we've seen some high-level NCP officials, wearing army fatigue and celebrating and going and taking over their previous headquarters and stuff like that. So the Libya scenario has actually escalated recently with the formation of this parallel government, which would cover most of the Darfur states and as well as Kordofan and Blue Nile. And this also, we don't have any solid proof for this, but we think that the Trump administration coming in, the Biden administration had some kind of symbolic, pressure on the UAE, but now it seems like the UAE has, a green light to actually not only re-up the RSF's resources and battle capability, but also to make political moves, like going in and trying to now bring in South Sudan to their fold as well. So it's not going to, it's going to be more of an escalation in the region more than it is a stalemate, unfortunately. And with this parallel government being formed, there's also the sense that Burhan and the NCP and the guys around SAF would be okay with another split in the country. South Sudan split off in 2011 from the Bashir regime. So now it's kind of the same leadership that would say, okay, if the RSF and the SPLM North and these guys want to take Darfur and Kurdufan, that's fine. And of course, Egypt is also kind of backing SAF, and they wouldn't have a problem either because that separation would include the countries that are along the Nile, along the Blue Nile and the White Nile. And that's really the main thing that Egypt is caring about as far as maintaining control over those regions. So it's still a little bit early to tell what's going to happen after this clear trajectory of taking over SAF taking over Khartoum and taking over Jazeera. But it's still kind of a little bit unknown as far as how this is going to happen, because also there are some talks here and there about like now the possibility of negotiations now that there's clearly demarcated state lines as far as control between SAF and RSF. They can now come to the negotiation table and maybe they do just a power split, which would completely kill, of course, like the revolutionary movement that happened in 2019 and the removal of Bashir and everything, and it would bring us back to square one, basically, where you have a Bashir-style government only split into two.
I know I always bring it back to this every time we talk to you, but I can't help but ask because it seems to have gotten even, more intense with regard to the war in Sudan. But can you talk a little bit about the role of outside regional actors, in particular Egypt and the UAE, which, while in the region of the Middle East, they do typically act on the same side, typically. In Sudan, it's not quite the case. And in fact, Egypt and the UAE, there's more splinters happening or taking place in the Middle East between them these days as well with regard to what's happening in Gaza. But anyways, I'm curious if you could kind of walk us through the outside forces and where they stand now as these developments take place in Sudan.
So it's still more or less the same. Egypt
Mm-hmm.
is primarily backing the SAF and UAE backing the RSF. Both of them have economic interests with both sides. There's the gold trade, there's livestock, there's these huge resources that are being siphoned out into both of these countries. So Egypt and UAE, they can keep a cordial relationship between them. They even have some investment relationships and everything. But because they don't really care like how many people in Sudan are killed or whether they go to war or anything, because they're looking out for their interests in the country. They're, the with Egypt, as long as they secure the states that are along the Nile, to them they don't care about what happens in the rest of Sudan. And the UAE, they know they have a strong foothold with the RSF and in Darfur and everything. And if they are able to expand to South Sudan and have that kind of relationship, then that's a huge amount of resources as well, including oil, including gold. So with them, it's kind of they're looking at it as it's like an MMA fight inside of Sudan. It's like who can duke it out, and everybody goes back to their corner and keeps their flow of resources. But of course, with the UAE, it's other things, like the Yemen war has been winding down and everything. So you see Saudi Arabia, for example, coming in, stepping up and giving more aid and everything because they don't want that connection to be broken either. And Saudi Arabia, they have a relationship with the RSF, but they're more leaning towards SAF. You have other actors that are more interested in propping up the theocratic rule in Sudan. So you have Turkey, you have to a certain extent, you have Iran. they're pretty much looking at the NCP and the Bashir era theocratic rule as their allies in the area. So it's a it's a spectrum of actors in the region. But the trajectory of where things are going with like the new Trump regime, and especially after what happened in Syria, if they're ready to give a body like HTS and try to polish them as legitimate rulers and everything, then you can only imagine like what they would accept as far as Sudan when it comes to regionally and convincing internationally. Because again, the West is looking at Sudan through a proxy lens, through the lens of their allies in the region, which include pretty much all of the above, maybe with the exception of Iran, but from Turkey, UAE, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, these are all kind of like the normalization, as Netanyahu put in his map, like the blessings countries. So they're actually like giving them complete control over what happens in Sudan. And the problem is now that the conflict is actually spreading, now there's like more of a sense of like, okay, the question mark of will they go ahead with this, theocratic and military and militia rule and, still siphon off the resources regardless of what happens, or will this spiral out into something that's not even controllable by them and hurt their interests as well?
Well, on that point, Masab, you mentioned it in your first answer. South Sudan now becoming more deeply embroiled in this in the context of their own divisions. There's a lot there, so I don't want to ask you in just several minutes to break down everything in South Sudan. But if you could give people a sense of the general scene there and how it's playing into the broader war in Sudan.
So South Sudan has been severely affected by the Sudan war. Other than the high levels of displacement, there were like millions of South Sudanese already in Sudan. A small number of them, like, were even like recruited into the RSF and everything. The main effect on South Sudan was the oil, because all of the oil pipelines from South Sudan flow through Sudan and out to Port Sudan on the Red Sea. So they're completely dependent on, that oil flowing. It's like more than 90% of the government's income in South Sudan is coming from this oil revenue. So months ago, like in last year, South Sudan, since the beginning of the war, they've been kind of talking to both sides. Like, guys, let's just, stop the fighting, let the oil flow. We'll mediate. We'll do anything to kind of, help bring the war to an end. But that didn't work. And then the oil stopped flowing. So since last year, South Sudan's been pretty secretive about like when exactly it stopped or how much of it is actually flowing through. But it's clear, like at least in the last 6 months or so, that the oil stopped flowing. And South Sudan's been, experiencing turmoil ever since. Because the main problem internally with South Sudan is instead of having reform after the 2018 peace deal, it became a situation where the central government would try to buy off the opposition and accommodate them, and basically another power sharing deal, but it always expands, like, different militias picking up arms in different parts of South Sudan. So an extremely volatile country that hasn't really seen a lot of peace like since its independence. So, and the other thing, there were supposed to be elections last year, and the president Salva Kiir, he canceled the elections, and that kind of made the other groups, pretty, worried that, okay, is he going to rule indefinitely and then hand off power to one of his allies instead of having elections and giving a chance for other groups. So there's an accumulation of issues in South Sudan that led to this flare up right now in Upper Nile State. And the South Sudan government is accusing the Burhan and the SAF government of actually supporting the opposition that's at war right now with the central government. So, and South Sudan is on the edge right now. Like, the people of South Sudan are very worried about another war breaking out. And it's actually, if that breaks out, we've already seen, for example, Uganda step into the fray and, like claiming that they have forces in South Sudan and that they will protect Kir and Juba. So you can see now, and this is not even to talk about like the threats from the Burhan Saf regime to Chad. This is not to mention the potential flare-up between Eritrea and Ethiopia again. So the more this kind of goes forward, the more we're looking at a possible regional war that's happening, and in all directions. Like it's going to be very hard to contain. So it's really a question mark at this point.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, a lot to cover and a lot to keep following. And as always, we are very, very happy to have you with us to help sort through it all. Musab Baba, researcher on Sudan. As always, thanks so much for giving us some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Rania?
Yeah, Eugene, I mean, it's just that last bit he was talking about there with regard to the way that this kind of thing can spiral into regional conflagrations. I mean, it's just the entire area of the world, the Middle East, North Africa. It's just like everywhere you look, the Sahel. It's like, well, actually, what's happening in the Sahel isn't. I mean, that's a different story. But the point is all of these different outside actors that are funneling weapons into these horrors, whether it's the genocide in Gaza or this ongoing horrific war in Sudan. It's just, people think it can just go on forever as like a status quo sort of situation. And it doesn't work like that. You don't just get to have a status quo genocide or a status quo killing nonstop, whether it's Congo, Sudan, Gaza. This stuff is going to spiral into other parts of the world. You can't separate or compartmentalize the world the way that the powers that be think you can. And so it stands to be seen how that might play out. But that's the first time I've really heard someone talk directly about that potential spiraling across the region.
Yeah, no, it's huge. And also worth noting that South Sudan borders the northeastern region of Democratic Republic of Congo that Uganda is very involved in. And they've been sending thousands of more troops into Congo, allegedly to fight the ADF and Codeco. But, these things could spill over into so many different areas. It's a terrible situation. So hopefully cooler heads will prevail, but we'll continue to cover and continue to follow it. Now we are going to turn back here to the U.S. to another crisis situation, and that is the crisis of debt of all types, which is, sort of a specter hanging over many, many millions of Americans. But there is resistance happening as well. So to cover both issues, we are very honored to be joined by Lindsay Muniak, who is a lead organizer with the Debt Collective. Lindsay, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. And I know you all are right in the middle of your 100 days to build debtor power, and I want to get to that. But maybe just to frame it for people who don't know, I don't know who that is. I think we're all kind of in the same boat here when we talk about debt. But I mean, when we talk about the debt crisis that's facing, people here in the U.S., working class people, what's the scale? What's the scope? What are we looking at?
I mean, what we're looking at, obviously, debt has been something that's been keeping countless Americans really feeling bound in really, really overwhelming and often coercive ways to a number of situations in our lives that create and reinforce these debt structures. So when we think about we're workers, okay? We're workers, we're being kind of frequently exploited. Our labor is being taken advantage of by our bosses. If we're in debt, we're less likely to resist that. And so I want to sort of introduce the question of debt by talking about this element of social control, of coercion, because I think even beyond the question of numbers, statistics, that function is critical, and is critical when we think about how this new Trump administration's policies are going to be driving countless people much further into debt by stripping public services, by squashing worker rights more fully, by deregulating finance, by removing equal opportunity protections. So what we're seeing is not only a kind of debt crisis at the level of a financial squeeze and people owing extraordinary amounts of money to a pool of creditors that is becoming smaller and smaller. But what we're also seeing is a crisis of debt that is meant to keep people fearful, meant to keep people alienated, and keeps us in isolation from one another, which is exactly what the Debt Collective, the organization that I'm here speaking on behalf of, tries to reverse. So we are a union of debtors, and what we fight for is debt abolition. And this is an important distinction because a lot of times when people talk about debt relief, they think about cancellation, right? Just wiping out debt that people may already have, giving them that clean slate, so to speak, and sending them on their way. What we want people to understand is that in an economic system that relies on keeping working people in debt, that is going to continue to reaccumulate. If debt is canceled at one point, it's going to build back up. And so what we're fighting for is debt abolition, meaning not just that immediate short-term debt relief, but the transformation of the systems that trap us in debt in order to meet our basic needs, in order to be able to get healthcare, to have housing, to put food on the table, to say nothing of education. Of course, the student debt fight has been a big part of our organization's entire trajectory. But yeah.
I mean, it's really incredible when you think about all the different aspects of debt. And you mentioned medical debt, student debt. There's people are in debt to pay their rent. I'm just curious if you can talk a bit about the fact that, you mentioned the Trump administration. Obviously, we've got it's not just the traditional idea of, this person who makes minimum wage is in debt. It's like your average American is in all kinds of debt. I mean, people are just living in debt. Even people who own things are living in debt. Yeah. I guess, can you speak to the fact that obviously this is very much a class issue, but a wide swath of the US population is actually facing this. It applies to pretty much everybody except for the wealthy.
Yes. So, I lead at the Debt Collective, I lead our work on healthcare, meaning medical debt. Or we use medical debt as a sort of like lens through which to approach the absolute crisis of our current healthcare system. And an estimated 41% of American adults owe medical debt right now. 41%. So just to your point, this is not an issue that affects some sort of small percentage of the population. This is something that is shaping the lives of like almost 1 out of every 2 people in the room that you're in at any given moment. Is struggling with this. And most of the time, people struggle with it in silence. I think that there's like an extraordinary amount of shame that really is always so infuriating to encounter, even though it's so understandable. I think I've certainly been there. Perhaps others here have too. But the way that we're sort of made to feel as though being in debt is like a moral stain, or we've done something wrong, we've managed our money poorly. When we have a system that, 41% of Americans struggling with medical costs right now, it's clearly a system that's designed to trap people in debt relations. And so that's actually where we're like, there's a huge opportunity here. There's this thing that's shaping all of our lives that none of us are really talking about. Increasingly, I think, especially with the discourse around student debt, we've started to break open that terrain a little bit. But when people start talking about their debts, suddenly it becomes a little bit more clear that it isn't a question of individual error or irresponsibility, that it's actually a system that's structured to keep us basically like on our back feet, which again makes workers less powerful. It shapes our entire lives, and even though it's highly racialized, gendered, all these dynamics that shape any type of injustice that we might talk about are there. It does affect such a massive swath of the population that we really see this as an opportunity to kind of build a mass movement that unites people across difference, whether it's geographic, economic, ethnic, racial. There's real power there that we don't want to leave on the table.
Well, I'm glad you asked that, and I was hoping you could talk more about the power that people have when they come together. Even the idea of a union of debtors, I think people understand like a union at their job, but maybe it's they don't understand how they can actually really affect systems and structures by coming together. I know that you all have been pushing majorly in the first 100 days of the Trump administration to really grow the movement. So maybe talk about that a little bit. The power and the leverage people really could have to change the system in the context of building a big mass movement.
Yeah, so I think, it seems clear, right, that in this first stage of the Trump administration, something has fundamentally broken politically. Like, we are in a different political moment, and that means that a lot of the advocacy tactics, policy reform processes that organizations have relied on, just as a almost default, move over the last however many years, certainly in the number of years that I've been organizing and working in the kind of movement sphere, that isn't going to work anymore. There's a lot, it's up for debate whether it's been working. I would say it hasn't. But what's really clear right now as we see this massive constitutional crisis unfolding at the federal level is that we need to think about different sites of power, different opportunities to build solidarity, and different places where we have leverage, where we can intervene, where we can interject. And so with the 100 Days to Build Better Power campaign, which is really an organizing drive, what we've been doing, and this just obviously, we launched this the first day of the Trump administration. Day 101 is May Day, May 1st, long history of, it's International Workers' Day, long history of radical resistance on that day. And so we're building 2 May Day actions across the country in coordination with labor and other partners. But really the idea was always like, we don't know exactly what form these first 100 days of the Trump administration will take, but we know that we need to be prepared to fight what they put down. And so the 100 Days to Build Better Power campaign has really focused on some of these areas that I think in movement spheres sometimes get discounted or undervalued, which are like organizing trainings, teaching people how to have one-on-ones, teaching people how to talk with their neighbors, with their family members, with their friends about what's happening, about their debts, about other ways that they're feeling nervous, anxious, not sure how to navigate this political moment, how to talk to those people and invite them into a movement to fight back. So we have organizing trainings, right? We have political education, which is really kind of breaking down the debt relations that we work on, healthcare, housing, education, helping people understand why these systems are trapping us in debt and what we can do to change that, where the pressure points are, how corporate power kind of maps across these different spheres of our lives, and the types of campaigns that we have built, that we are building to target those actors who are keeping us squeezed, really, is how a lot of people describe the feeling of being deeply in debt, feeling very squeezed. So we have, organizing trainings, political education, and then just solidarity building, which we've been doing through what we call debtors assemblies, opportunities for people to actually talk about what it feels like to be in debt, their experience of debt. Oftentimes people haven't ever talked about it. And it's such a huge force in our lives that goes really, I think, under discussed because of this shame that I was talking about, because of this feeling of guilt or embarrassment. And so with these 100 days, we've been holding events, and I would love to encourage anyone who's listening to this right now to go online. If you go to bit.ly/100 days debtor power, or you can go to debtcollective.org. That's debtcollective.org, not debt collector. Sometimes people in organizing calls get that mixed up, which we're like, oh, no, the opposite. But you can look at our events page and see some of the upcoming 100 days events and get in the loop, build with us toward May Day, and really focus on consolidating our power, because God knows that the right has done so.
They certainly have. I wanted to ask you kind of the trajectory of some of this, though, because obviously debt has always been a huge part of capitalism of the US, but it's gotten worse in recent decades. And I'm just curious if you could speak to that. And I'm actually, maybe that's a crazy assumption on my part. Maybe it's always been this bad, or has it in fact gotten worse because of changes in policy?
No, it's not a crazy assumption at all. In fact, it has gotten much worse. And you will be unsurprised to learn that it maps really onto this drive toward privatization, toward what became this sort of like neoliberal state that we saw over the last few decades, starting really or picking up steam under the Reagan years. And so debt, I think in some cases very explicitly, there are records of Reagan when he was governor of California, talking with his colleagues about, as students were protesting on the UC campuses and planning coordinated actions, talking with his colleagues about how debt would basically be a way to get these students under control. So when we think about student debt, it's really important to think about, again, this element of social control, coercion. People are less likely to resist if they feel extremely economically insecure. And so student debt really has kind of like ballooned. You see it starting then, and obviously we're before some of the debt relief measures that this past administration did manage to put through. Too little, too late, but still some good things. The 2 trillion dollar day was approaching. So $2 trillion of student debt. And it's a little bit lower than that, but we'll hit it again quite soon. And then with healthcare, I mean, it's, as I was saying, I mean, I mentioned the kind of like 41% of adults statistic. I think it's like over 100 million Americans altogether. So it's just like a huge portion of the population. And this has really been tacking alongside what we've seen in healthcare, as like healthcare has become increasingly commodified, has increasingly become a site of profit, where you have healthcare institutions, not just insurance companies and pharmaceuticals companies, which we often think about, but also hospitals who have basically adopted a growth model that is requiring them to, and I use this term, I should add a little caveat that like when I say it's requiring them, I don't let them off the hook in any way. But they've adopted a growth model that relies on basically this kind of like growth from year to year, expansion of profit from year to year, which has resulted in basically driving up costs, squeezing patients harder for healthcare costs that none of us can afford, and really just sort of like relying on the debt and the money that's often sort of like it's debt that may exist from taking out a payday loan that may be put on a credit card. It may not be the form of unpaid bills that have gone to collections, but these institutions are relying on that debt from patients to basically grow into these mini empires, regional monopolies. And so the debt crisis that we see in the US really does tack to the patterns of financialization, of privatization, of commodification in the US. And we can, I think, very safely assume that it will continue to. And that's one of the reasons that it's so important for us to be preparing people at the start of this administration for fighting back over the coming months, years. We have years, because we know that what this administration, the patterns that they're leaning into, the kind of total dismantling of the administrative state, the privatization of everything, are the same patterns that have already produced an untenable debt situation and that will continue to intensify that. And I think the question is like, will we fight back or will we be left insecure, isolated from one another, as we watch this unfold and as we watch our entire lives and communities be decimated by the right.
Well, the stakes are incredibly high, and we really appreciate you joining us, Lindsay, and all the work of the Debt Collective. Thanks for being with us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care.
Rania?
Wow. I mean, debt is no joke, and it's real, and I can understand that shame. I've seen my own family members, and even myself. I mean, we all end up in debt at some point in this country, right? Like, it's impossible not to be. It's built to be that way, so great work they're doing at the Debt Collective.
No, absolutely. Shout out to them. Really appreciate them joining. Well, we're going to keep moving on here to another critical issue here in the United States, and that's the ongoing crackdown on students, both at the undergraduate and the graduate level, who have been standing up for the Palestinian people who are continuing to endure a genocide. And we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show by Grant Minor, who, of course, was expelled from Columbia and is also the president of UAW Local 2710. I even saw him out on the streets today. Grant, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me. And yes, coming right from a rally up at Columbia.
Right on. Well, it's great to have you here. Really appreciate you joining us in the midst of everything. I mean, it seems, let me just ask you this, Grant. I mean, what do you think is really behind the Trump administration pulling? I mean, this is a massive crackdown that we're seeing day after day after day, students being targeted. We're seeing universities like Columbia totally capitulate to the Trump administration. What are they so afraid of to be bringing such a heavy boom down on the solidarity movement with Palestine?
Yeah, I mean, it's an unprecedented usage of leverage. I can't really recall ever seeing, hundreds of millions of dollars being withheld, already congressionally granted money being held from large research universities for stuff like LGBTQ health and climate science, all to sort of punish domestic dissent. Like, what do I think is behind it? I mean, I think that what really scares them is that the movement really isn't stopping. The students are still very energized. And I mean, we saw today, people are more energized now than ever. So I think that they're sort of realizing that if they're actually going to try to stamp out this movement, they're going to need to, play dirty. I mean, it's not going to work, but I think this is their thought process.
It's really frightening, Grant. I mean, I must have watched the video of the student at Tufts University who got arrested, I think 2 days ago now, just in broad daylight. Like, I know you saw it too. I must have watched it like 12 times because I just couldn't believe how casual it is for these masked agents who are in plain clothes to just walk up to this girl and like handcuff her without charging her with anything and take her away to Louisiana, apparently. Some ICE detention facility, I believe the same one they initially took Mahmoud Khalil to. And I mean, you were at Columbia University. You're featured prominently in this film, The Encampments, which comes out today in theaters. And obviously, like, you've had to deal with being fired, being expelled, which is horrible, and then watching your I guess colleagues, fellow students be arrested and sent into these like torture facilities. I don't know what else to call them. And I'm just curious your general thoughts on that, on the fact that we're in a situation where these students across the country at this point are having their visas revoked, and in some cases, their green cards don't seem to mean anything and are being put into prison for having an opinion that opposes genocide.
Yeah, I mean, it was tremendously distressing. I remember finding out about it. I mean, originally, I had received word that, there had been unarrest. It wasn't clear whether somebody was let out or whatever. But as the sort of the facts became clear over like the next 5, 6 hours as to what had happened the last night, I mean, it's horrifying. I mean, there's not really any way to sum it up. I mean, seeing the videos of this latest the Tufts graduate student get arrested, it's just like, I mean, I keep saying it feels like cheap words. It's like something out of a movie, but like these masked people just coming up and throwing somebody into a van and just like using extrajudicial rendition to just a site away from their lawyers, away from people who love them. It's really, I think it's a dark turn. And 50% of UAW 2710's membership is international students. Our graduate school has a lot of people coming from all over. And this is something that, is really scary to a lot of our members. I mean, it feels like a personal attack on higher ed workers, but also immigrants everywhere.
Grant, you've spoken about this in different fora before, but of course the pretext for this, the umbrella they're throwing over this, is that this is an effort to stamp out anti-Semitism in America, and that this is really just to protect Jewish people, and especially on campus. You are someone coming, from the Jewish community. I mean, I wonder how that strikes you, and if in fact it has a pernicious effect in terms of how people are seeing the importance of standing up against all forms of bigotry.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly is an ironic place where we're in. I mean, it's always been very ironic that like, people who are or Jewish people who are anti-Zionists are sort of smeared as sort of self-hating Jews. But I think that these actions to deport people is making people feel much more emboldened. I mean, I hear, awful things about Arab students, about Middle Eastern students. I see them on Twitter. But the same language is now being used against Jewish students as well. I mean, like, people were calling me like a traitorous rat. They were speculating that I was pretending to be Jewish. And obviously this is sort of part and parcel of narratives of like of who is a terrorist, that sort of using that appellation to punish people standing up for what's right in the United States. I mean, it's you're looking at 150-year history easily. But yeah, I mean, I think that it really we're in a bad place in terms of how specifically the right is emboldened to talk about people. But I think that like also, there is a hopeful note here, and that like people realize that this is wrong. I mean, today at Columbia, we had it wasn't just my union that was rallying, it was all the UAW locals. That was staff, that was postdoc workers at Columbia, that was contract faculty, so non-tenure faculty, that was student workers at other affiliated institutions. And then we went outside and you see like NYU faculty, New School graduate students. I mean, all over people are standing up and, saying like, this isn't okay. And I mean, I think that there's a reason why, this moment is the reason that like all of our unions are sort of working together to put forward unified demands for the first time that I can remember. I mean, it's in one way, it's like, as I said, it's horrifying, but in another way, it's it gives me hope that like people aren't going to stand for this.
I wanna speak to specifically Columbia University, because obviously the documentary film that Breakthrough News and Watermelon Pictures produced with Macklemore, that again you were featured prominently in. I want to talk about this a bit because it goes back in time to last year when these encampments started, and Columbia University is where they started, where you were quite active. And the repression that students faced was so extreme, and this film does a really good job of highlighting what these encampments were about, and really pushing back against the dominant mainstream right-wing narrative that portrays people like you as just like vicious anti-Semites that have brought back 1930s Germany or something. And also demonstrates how this country, under the Biden administration, I should point out, sent police into these university campuses to essentially like beat up students and arrest them. And since you are featured prominently in this film, I'm just curious if you can talk a bit about, based on everything we've just discussed, why you think it's so important for people to, one, go watch this film, and two, what it means moving forward, because this isn't over. It's not like this is something that happened last year and now it's a closed book. It's people are being arrested, people are being expelled, people are being fired. And given what just happened at Columbia, where they basically capitulated to Trump's demands, there is basically, as we've seen a lot of people call it, a blueprint that they would like to use nationally for how to shut down academic freedom across universities.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that one of the most important reasons that Mahmoud is still in jail, it speaks to who Mahmoud is as a person, to the movement that he represented. He was, I'm a union guy. He represented me at the bargaining table with the university. And I think it really is important to get people out to see this because, as you said, it totally blows away all of the media narrative around the encampments. I mean, one of my favorite moments in the film is like, you see just, students enjoying themselves. Like you see a mariachi band playing, you see, students having Havdalah, Jewish students having Havdalah. And it really just calls into question. Like I remember talking to relatives about it, and they're saying like, hey, like this all seems crazy. It really paints the situation as crazy. Like, why are we snatching these people off the streets when what they were doing is, sitting on a lawn, singing songs, educating themselves about a really, really important, perhaps the most important, moral issue of our times, in which their university is deeply complicit. I mean, these are members of a community coming together as a community to discuss and protest what that community participates in. And I think that that's the reason why it's important to get people out, to sort of educate people about what the people in the halls of power are calling like a violent extremist movie or extremist movement. This is not a violent extremist movie. It's the opposite.
Well, as you mentioned too, Grant, I mean, there's a lot of outrage and a lot of people standing up, a lot of people who are very concerned over what is taking place. I mean, not just obviously with the crackdown on students, but now the, acceleration of the genocide in Gaza, the expansion into the West Bank of hostilities in every possible way. And you know, I hear through the grapevine that on April 5th of this year, people are going to Washington, D.C., I think, to raise their voices about some of these things. I mean, I just wonder, how important do you think it is for people to be at protests and other events like this in this moment, given the stakes?
I think it's very important. I think it's we've done a couple of these. I'm excited to we say like get on the bus. I'm excited to go down to Barclays Center or wherever the Brooklyn bus is leaving from and get on with the same people I've been doing it for the past over a year. And I think that local organizing is really important. And we're all committed to local organizing. But it's time that we gave Biden that energy. We need to give Trump that energy. We need to show him, especially now, that this is completely insane, and we need to put a stop to it. It's time for a people's arms embargo. The American people aren't ready to have just random residents deported, all in the service of arming a foreign genocide apartheid state. So we need to show up in huge numbers.
Grant, I want to ask you about something. You gave a really amazing speech at this event that took place in New York City last Saturday. It was a Free Mahmoud, Free Palestine event. And I loved everything you said. I came up to you and told you how much I loved everything you said. And I want to reiterate that. It was an excellent speech. People should go check it out. Breakthrough News streamed that event. But you said something that I kind of was hoping you could elaborate on a bit, because I don't know if a lot of people know this about you, but you are actually not only Jewish yourself, but you were studying. You were involved in Jewish studies. You were like getting a PhD in Jewish studies, like very much involved in Judaism in so many ways, academically, actually. And so I only raise that to say, I mean, they're saying they're doing this all in the name of fighting anti-Semitism. And here you are, a Jewish kid who got expelled and fired for being against genocide. So I don't know, that seems pretty anti-Semitic to me. But you said something in your speech last week where you noted that, and I think it's so important for Jews to be speaking out against genocide, because it is being done in the name of, the Jewish state or whatnot, and in the name of fighting anti-Semitism. But you noted that being Jewish doesn't somehow give you like extra insight, or doesn't mean you somehow like your voice matters more. And I mean, hearing that as an Arab was very interesting to me, because I think for so much of my life, I mean, I do appreciate Jews who speak out, but even I've always felt like, yeah, what this person actually is saying does matter more because they're saying it as a Jew. So I'm just curious if you could speak to that a little bit, because I just thought it was an interesting comment you made.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. I'm getting a PhD in comp lit, but I do work on Jewish medieval texts. The irony besides, yeah, I think it is important that Jewish people stand up and identify themselves as such when they are in the movement for Palestine. But I also think that it's important to recognize that you don't have to be a Jewish person or an Arab to talk about this. For example, people at Columbia would say like, well, why do you care? Like, this seems like a boutique issue. Like, obviously you guys are anti-Semitic, otherwise you wouldn't care about this. But I think that's actually not true. It's not just like a fight between Arabs and Jews. I mean, that framing is just completely ridiculous, historically speaking. But besides that, I mean, as I said, it's like everybody can see what's going on. This is what is pretty much the first televised genocide. Anybody watching what is going on in Gaza can easily see what the morally correct position is. It's not complicated. It's not nuanced. Just look with your eyes and you'll see, which is why I felt like I needed to include that. Not to sort of, say it's not important that Jewish people talk, but just to say like, and also I think it's also important that, I'm from Sacramento. My ancestors, as far as I can trace it to my knowledge, have never lived in Palestine. And so, it's like first stop Ukraine, before that, maybe Spain, maybe think, I don't know. But yeah, so, I don't have any special claim to this knowledge besides, the responsibility that I feel that I bear for, discussing, my community's wider complicity or commitment to these ideas.
Well, critically important on many different levels. I just want to ask you here before we let you go, and we spoke to this a little bit, but the labor element of this, I feel, has been so important. And of course, when you were expelled from Columbia, it was basically right before there was the starting of bargaining going on. I was hoping you could just talk a little bit more about that in the context of what we've seen over the past, several years of this huge wave of unionization of grad students and others on universities, and how this repression is really, impacting and has impacted over the past year, the labor situation on campus.
Yeah, it was really disappointing to see Columbia totally, A, capitulate to Trump, but B, just show cowardice. There was no reason why they needed to cancel bargaining. I'm sure they realized it was going to be a rally, and were like, we don't want to deal with this. And so they unilaterally canceled our first session. We had hundreds of members who were really excited. We have open bargaining at Columbia, and we're excited to get the ball rolling on a contract. And I'll say, one of the first articles that we plan to bring to the table is our package dealing with international students. And so this would this is working towards codifying important protections for international students. So by kicking the can down the road on that, Columbia is sending a pretty strong statement about what they view as important. Like, they don't want to come to the table and discuss how we can protect our community, how we can make scholarship better, our lives better. They would rather just not meet, which I think, like I said, it speaks for itself. But, as you said, we're higher ed has a lot of union density. And as featured today at our rally, we're going to hold their feet to the fire. We have a number of cross-union demands, not just SWC. So, work towards freeing Mahmoud Khalil, ensure that our research, which is being threatened by these cuts, is not cut. Activate that $15 billion endowment to try to make up for losses, and actually take a stand against Trump. They've just completely folded over. And they can sue the federal government. The American Association of University Professors is already making moves to sue the federal government against these deportations. So I would ask, why is it that the professors have to do it, but the actual billion-dollar institutions don't feel moved to protect us? I mean, I tell this story a lot, and perhaps I overtell it, but I just think of our member Ranjani, who had their visa revoked, and rather than actually helping them, Columbia sent staff to their door to try to evict them from their Columbia apartment illegally, I might add, as well as instantly just basically fired them from their job. It's just completely unacceptable, and it's high time that Columbia be face consequences for the way that it's throwing its community under the bus.
Well, Grant Minor, president of UAW Local 2710, thank you so much for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks so much. Until next time.
Rania?
Well, I think Grant is just absolutely wonderful, and you can see more of Grant if you go see the movie, The Encampments. He's one of 3 or 4 essentially protagonists who kind of narrate the film. And it's really, really, really incredible. You get to know him. You get to know Mahmoud Khalil. You get to know this lovely student activist, Sweda. You get to know Nai. I mean, you got to go watch this film. It'll make you laugh. It'll make you cry. It'll make you feel empowered. And most importantly, I just want to reiterate, and you're going to hear this again, but I'm going to drill it into everyone's head. This is an anti-genocide film. It's a pro-Palestine film. And it sets the record straight. And as a result, it's going to face hardship and getting picked up nationally unless a lot of people go to see it. So if you are able to, if you're in New York City, if you're in LA, or if you're in DC, wherever you are, go to the-encampments.com. Check out where it's showing in the next week or two, and if it's anywhere near you, please go see it. I promise you will not regret it. It's an amazing film, and then you'll also be helping the film get picked up nationally.
Yeah, so we certainly will hope for that. So certainly thanks to Grant, and thanks to everyone who is supporting us and moving forward with this film. And of course, thanks to Watermelon Pictures, our partner in putting this out as well. Well, we want to turn now to another, I can't even call it one issue, sort of compounding set of issues around working class people, the struggle around the right to have a roof over your head and all the things that come with that. And we are very, very honored to have with us here on the show Brian Goldstone, who's the author of There Is No Place for Us, Working and Homeless in America. Brian, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's an honor to have you. I have to say the book is fantastic. I have to tip my hat to you. I haven't been as fired up and moved by something in some time. I want to get into a lot of aspects of the book, but I guess in some ways I want to start here. I think one of the things that you continually point to is that even what we know of as the homelessness crisis in America, which I think a lot of people have some sense of, especially if you live in a major city, is really an underplaying of how bad this situation is and how significant it's becoming. And I was hoping you could speak to that.
Absolutely. One argument that I try to make in this book, based on my reporting, is that as bad as the official numbers are, as sprawling as the tent encampments have become in many cities in America, the tents are just the tip of the iceberg. And in many ways, what my book is trying to document is everything that lies under the water surface, the rest of that humongous iceberg. And, what we see on the street is actually just a tiny sliver of America's total homeless population. And there's this entire world of homelessness that is not just out of sight physically, but has literally been rendered invisible by the federal government by defining people's experience of homelessness out of existence. And they literally don't count. Every year when the homeless census is conducted, none of the families I wrote about in this book would be counted. So there's this entire world of homelessness that we're not only not seeing, but if we were to take it seriously and confront it in its reality, it would force us to rethink our assumptions about both what causes homelessness and the kinds of solutions we need to really tackle this catastrophe at scale.
It's really incredible, the words working homeless. I mean, because like you said, I mean, the sort of stereotype in the American imagination of homelessness is like some drug addict who like really made really bad decisions in life, or some lazy person who's just like, that's what happens to you. That's a consequence of just those things, right?
That's right.
The idea that someone could have a job, in some cases multiple jobs, and also still not be able to afford housing, it just blows my mind that that's even a term. So I guess, can you elaborate a bit on what that means? Like, how many people are we talking about here? Who is this impacting? Are these people with families? Are these people making minimum wage? Is it because the cost of housing is so expensive? And is this something that's new?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I think it's important to note that when I'm talking about the tents just being the tip of the iceberg, it's not to suggest that people living on the street are not in the formal labor force, that they're the lazy ones, that they're the irresponsible ones, that it's their own sort of individual pathologies that led them to become homeless. I cite a statistic in the book that even among those who are on the street or in shelters, in other words, those who are officially counted, about 40% of those on the streets are engaged in wage labor, and about 50% of those in shelters are engaged in wage labor. So even those who are visible are part of this kind of working homeless phenomenon, but we as a country have denied that reality, because to put those two words together, working and homeless, is really to call into question some of the most fundamental beliefs that many Americans hold about their country, about the American dream, about that if you just work hard enough, you may not strike it rich, but you'll at least be able to have this sort of minimum standard of security or stability, this most basic human need, a roof overhead. And what my reporting shows in following these families over about 2 years is that people are working and working and working some more, and it's not enough. So we have to really reckon with the working side of that equation, in working homeless. What is it about the changing nature of work in this country that has led it to be not enough? We're not only talking about poverty wages, but we're talking about the stripping away of labor protections and the ability to have sick leave. One family in my book, the mother is diagnosed with breast cancer and ovarian cancer, and she has to decide, is she going to go to her warehouse job and be able to keep her family in this squalid extended stay hotel room? Otherwise, they'll be on the street. Or is she going to go to her chemotherapy appointment? If she goes to the appointment, she doesn't have any sick leave, so she doesn't get paid. That's the kind of country we have made for ourselves. And so, yeah, that term working homeless, it kind of cuts to the heart. And I would argue demythologizes much of what we have come to assume about work and homelessness slash extreme poverty alike.
Well, I'm glad you made the point about demythologizing, because I mean, the book, I couldn't put it down because you become so invested in the stories of people. I think for me, it felt because you can see yourself and people you know in every single person, and you just see like time after time after time. It's like, it's infuriating because you're just thinking like, if they just had this one break or this one, it would have been fine. And you just get trapped in these cycles. And I was hoping you could just talk about that in terms of the way we approach this issue, because I think so often, people don't realize that it's, your house burning down, or like, you just things that are just happening. But once you're in there, you're trapped, and then there's really no intervention to help you sort of get out. But anyway, I don't know exactly where I'm going with there, but I thought it was a crucial part of the book.
Well, yeah, and I appreciate using the language of trapped because these 5 families who I followed over a period of about 2 years, they find themselves trapped in a brutal cycle of precarity and homelessness. And it's important to use the word brutal here. I use that intentionally because at every turn in their journey, there are actors who are profiting off of their insecurity. There are entire business models that are capitalizing on this precarity, and I think that the kind of profit motive behind housing insecurity in America is so I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but ludicrously left out of the conversation about housing and homelessness. The power asymmetry that exists between landlords and tenants in this country. So you mentioned, a family whose house burns down. That's a very dramatic beginning to their story. An abusive ex burns down the house of this mother and her children. And it's easy to read that story and say, oh, well, they became homeless because their house burned down. No, they became homeless because their landlord was a private equity firm that in a state like Georgia was able to file an eviction on this family because they refused to pay rent on a house that had burned down. Not only the current month's rent, but the next month's rent as well in order to break their lease. When they refused to do that, they went on their way and they continued their search for housing. And when the mother finally applies for an apartment, she learns that months earlier, this private equity firm filed an eviction against her, unbeknownst to her. In Georgia, you're allowed to do what's called a tack and mail dispossessory notice. So you don't even have to be informed in person that you were evicted. On the eviction notice, the sheriff wrote, served to fire damaged property, and left it in the mailbox. Months later, this mother, Celeste, finds out that an eviction has been handed down. The judge, in her absence, handed down a default judgment, and her credit score was tanked. This 3-digit number, this credit score that has come to determine whether Americans have access to things like housing or healthcare or any number of other things, was tanked, and they became trapped in this cycle. So I think the language of trapped is important, and we have to be talking about exploitation. We have to be talking about power. This is not just about not having enough housing units.
A few years back, I made this kind of mini documentary on homeless families in Washington, D.C. And it was specifically single moms. There were these homeless single mothers with children. And I mean, DC gets really cold too, like in the winter time. And there is some shelters, but they're actually not easy to get into. I'm sure you know all of this because you know the homelessness crisis. But I guess I say that to ask, how much of this is kids? How much of this is families with kids?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to talk about this without getting emotional. This is one of the earliest conversations I've been able to have, but it's very hard to talk about this. And I think we should stop and get choked up and not talk about kids who are experiencing this kind of homelessness in this abstract way. It was utterly heartbreaking to witness what these children went through in for such utterly preventable reasons, right? Because it was profitable for someone to put this child's family through what they went through. Their futures were literally being strangled, right? That public health researchers use this phrase toxic stress to describe what happens to children over the long term, over the course of their lives, when they don't have access to just these basic human necessities. And when they don't know when they leave school each day, are they going to be sleeping in a Walmart parking lot that night with their mom? And in the morning, bathing, so to speak, in the sink of that Walmart, while their mom is terrified that the police are going to knock on her window in the middle of the night and call Child Protective Services and take those children away. In Georgia, over a third of child removals in the state are because of inadequate housing, right? So that same Child Protective Service agency refuses to give these families housing assistance to keep them in their homes. But once you lose your home, you can have your children taken away. So at every step, these kids are experiencing pretty acute trauma. And I'm still trying to come to terms with that.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you. It's hard to wrap your head around, and even to put yourself in the place of some of these young folks in the book, and the things that they have to do to try to, also keep their family afloat at such a young age, 10, 12 years old, having to watch after younger kids, the shame of, should I be working? Should I drop out of school? I mean, it's so many different pieces. And I think the other thing that I really appreciate about the book in a way is the COVID crisis and the impact that had on education and learning and so many different things. And I guess I just use that to sort of transition a little bit here to my next question is, to meet this problem, what do we need? Because I think the point you make is so right. Like, it's not just about enough housing units. Like, the other thing that comes up a lot is the role of domestic violence and housing insecurity. I mean, what's the holistic way of really pushing forward on this?
There's so many systems that are interlocking here to make this crisis possible. So many uniquely American maladies, like a lack of healthcare. In Georgia, one of the families in the book, the mother gets to the point where she is at sort of a breaking point emotionally and psychologically, and finally works up the courage to reach out for a therapist. And when she calls the Medicaid number, she's told, sorry, your form of Medicaid only covers family planning, sterilization, birth control. You don't have access to any mental health services. If she lived in, say, Massachusetts, she would have access to. So you have so many interlocking maladies here that are militating against the stability of these families. But I want to be really clear that this isn't, I'm frustrated sometimes reading about homelessness in America, because at the end of an article or a movie or whatever, you're almost given a sense of like, well, who's to say what caused their homelessness? Was it their misfortune? Was it their proclivity to drink? Was it the domestic violence? All of those things become risk factors, right? All of those things might make you a little less likely, including, we should mention, your race. Like, there's a cliche that anyone can fall into homelessness in America. Well, the fact that 93% of families in Atlanta who experience homelessness are Black in a no longer Black majority city tells us that no, some people are a little more likely to become homeless than others for historical reasons, for political reasons, for economic reasons. This isn't just sort of a you slip and fall into homelessness sort of thing. But it's very important to be clear that at the root of all of this is a paradigm that is a status quo that says that housing is a commodity, it's a vehicle for wealth accumulation, and that the few who are lucky enough to own property in this country will invariably profit at the expense of the many, many, many more who are just in need of a place to live. And we've allowed housing to be auctioned off to the highest bidder. And we call that the market. We call that the private market. We call it supply and demand. During the pandemic, you mentioned COVID, there was so much outrage when people were hoarding hand sanitizer and N95 masks, right? And then they were selling them on eBay for like $90 a pop. That's what we've allowed housing to become in this country. We've allowed this absolutely essential resource to be hoarded. And the government just sort of says, well, whoever's lucky enough to get it, that's great. Everyone else, you're left to fend for yourself. And yeah, and that has to change fundamentally.
Hmm. Well, I have to say, everyone has to read this book. There is no place for us working and homeless in America. Even if you think you know, you need to read this book. Crucially important. Brian, I really appreciate you writing the book and being willing to share some of your time with us here on the Freedom Side.
It means the world to me to be able to speak to you. So thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's really important work. I think a lot of times there's, well, not a lot of times, always there's groups of people that everybody is just able, they're just so invisibilized. And this is one of them. And it's a huge group of people. Like, it's a huge chunk of Americans we're talking about here.
Yeah, no, I mean, I really have to say I really meant what I said at the beginning. I haven't felt more passionate about a book in many, many years. I mean, I really think it's important people read it. And like I said, if you think you know why people are homeless in America, read this book. And I think you'll see that all of us, or at least many of us, and I think Brian makes a good point about the different risk factors, could be in a very similar situation. So I think it's really important. And shout out to everyone who spoke to him and really bared their soul for that book, because people really gave a lot of their story, I think, in important ways. Well, Rania, you mentioned it a couple times here on the show. We do have the film, The Encampments, the-encampments.com, by the way, Breakthrough Media, Watermelon Pictures. You were able to interview the executive producer, Macklemore, the hip-hop artist, earlier today about the film and more about it. So I think we want to be able to show that interview now.
I'm honored to be joined on Breakthrough News by rapper Macklemore. Macklemore, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm really excited to talk to you about The Encampments, this new feature film that you executive produced in collaboration with Breakthrough News and Watermelon Pictures. And it's in theaters starting today at the Angelica Theater in New York City. People can go get tickets right now for all upcoming shows at the-encampments.com. But before we get into that, I wanted to start with just a couple questions about your speech from last week, over the weekend, at the Free Mahmoud, Free Palestine event in New York City, which I had the privilege of witnessing in person. And I have to say, it was electrifying. It was very raw, honest, and I think deeply moving for the entire crowd. People can go actually watch the speech on our YouTube page at Breakthrough News. But you said something in your speech that really stuck with me, and I want to quote it. You said, "The light of Palestinian resistance, struggle, and unwavering faith cracked my heart open. I was experiencing what happens when the internal pain from being silent outweighs the risk of speaking up in moments of injustice. And once you see it, you can't unsee it." And then you spoke just about like the horrors of what's happening, but also about your political evolution and how this issue has radicalized you and how that shift has come with real consequences, especially since you're a public figure. So if you could just maybe talk about what pushed you to that moment and to speak out the way you have, and how has this journey changed you?
Oh, I don't know how you can watch what we have seen the last 18 months and not be moved. As a parent of three kids, I see my kids every day. I see my kids. I mean, I just posted something on my story of a young girl crying over what I presume to be like a relative or a parent in a white sheet. And we've seen this for the last 18 months. I don't I just see my 6-year-old. I see my 9-year-old. I see my 3-year-old. I see mothers and fathers. I see grandparents. I see human beings, Palestinian life that has been completely not only desecrated, but just not valued the same over and over and over again. And I was watching this, in October of 23, and you watch it for long enough a day, and it's like, how are we allowing this to happen? How are we funding this? How are we complicit in this? And what is our moral responsibility to step up in this moment? And particularly as an artist, and I was on tour at the time in the States, and it was one of those times in my life where I just had ample opportunity to research being on the road. I had ample opportunity to have conversations. And at a certain point, I was like, yeah, I said it in the speech, like that internal voice inside that's like, bro, how are you not saying anything right now? How are you going to fall back on your own privilege and your own comfort as an entire population is being genocided? And all it took was one other artist, Kaylani. I saw that she was saying something, and the ripples of that gave me the courage to be like, all right, this is time to step up.
Yeah, I hope people watching you who maybe haven't said anything yet will get some of that courage as well from hearing you speak out. And I remember back in I think it was the November 2023 rally for Palestine, and you kind of took everyone by surprise when you got on the mic. And one thing you said was, "They told me to do my research." Well, I did my research, and that's why I'm right on this. You also said something on Saturday that really struck a chord with me, and I think a lot of people as well, about how your heart has hardened over this last year and a half. And you said, and I'm quoting you, "I've wanted the world to wake up so desperately that a part of me has fallen asleep." I keep coming back to that question, how do we get people to care? I've been asking the wrong question. The question isn't how can we get people to care, it's how can we be of the utmost service to humanity. And then you talked about just kind of that general exhaustion from grief that we're all feeling, that sort of numbness that takes over, in addition to the outrage and how it can lead to a sort of paralysis. I mean, I have to say, like, hearing you say that the way you did really helped snap me out of that feeling, at least in that moment. So I'm just curious, since everyone's sort of in that feeling as we're in sort of genocide 2.0, how do you think we move through that helplessness, especially when we're in community, which is so important, and when we're not alone in this?
I think you said it. I think community is really important. Um, because the phone is a dark place. The phone is a dark place. I go to sleep, seeing footage coming out of Gaza. I wake up seeing footage coming out of Gaza. I watch moves that the Trump administration is making, or moves that Biden was making along the way. And I feel insane at times. And I realize that if I am in this cycle of constantly on the phone, of in kind of this silo of just focusing on this moment in Gaza, I actually can't be of the utmost service. Because I need to be tapped into my heart in order to move from a place of love and compassion and empathy. And it's this delicate balance, right? Because I'm definitely not turning the phone completely off. I don't want to become apathetic. I don't want to feel overwhelmed. And that's such a sentiment that I hear so often, is people being like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. We all feel that way. But what I don't want to do is fall into like shoulder shrug, like we tried and this is beyond us. I don't think it's beyond us. I do think that this is a movement of the heart, that this is a movement of love, that this is a movement of getting off of your couch, getting into community, and being around those people that spark that flame of resistance. Because we are powerful in numbers. We have actual when we come together rooted in resistance, we can sway this, but we don't know our power. And they being the, Trump administration right now, is trying to suppress that power. And that's what the encampments is all about. And we're seeing it at Tufts yesterday. We're seeing it with Mahmoud. We're seeing it across the country, is they are instilling fear to let us know that your voice can be used against you. Peacefully protesting can and will be used against you, and we cannot succumb to that fear.
And since you mentioned the encampments, I want to talk to you a bit about that, since it's coming out this week in theaters in the US, and more showings to come. You're the executive producer of this film, which, again, I'll mention you made in collaboration with Breakthrough News and Watermelon Pictures, and it focuses on the student protests against the genocide in Gaza and the crackdown against them. And people, again, can go find tickets and showings at the-encampments.com. So can you tell our audience, what is the Encampments about, and why is it so important right now?
The Encampments is about the student-led protests at Columbia University in April of 2024, last year. And it really breaks down what this movement was all about. which is a movement rooted in students protesting, making demands against their university that is funding and complicit and financially invested in weapons that are used to kill Palestinian people. And very simple demands. Let's disclose the information, show where our investments are actually going, and divest. This is not complicated. This is again a movement that was rooted in love and resistance and against oppression, against genocide, against ethnic cleansing, and it got deemed something completely different. You see weaponized terms like anti-Semitic being used, or hateful, or these quote unquote little Gazans disrupting this educational institution. When in actuality, these are students that are really using their voice, their courage to mobilize and to rekindle the flame of a movement that at the time was really at this place of kind of a crossroads. A lot of us were feeling that burnout. We were feeling like, you know what, this isn't working. And what the students at Columbia did was simple. It was simple. It was, let's set up some tents in the lawn of our school and say we have had enough. And the Encampments film shows that story. It shows the story of Mahmoud. We're reminded of student-led protests in the 60s, of taking over Hamilton Hall, Hens Hall. We are reminded of what it looks like when people step up for the most marginalized and risk their educational merits, risk their degrees, risk deportation, like Mahmoud is. Mahmoud plays protagonist in is a protagonist in the film, in real life, and you see it dispels this notion of any sort of hate, any sort of terrorism, or any notion of anything that isn't literally human beings coming together and saying we cannot fund a genocide. Simple as that.
And then I wanted to ask you if you could also speak to why it's so important for people to actually go out and see this film in person. I mean, we all know how hard it is for a pro-Palestine film to get real visibility, especially nationally. But when theaters see that people are showing up, that really matters. It helps the film travel, get picked up in more cities, reach the audience as it deserves.
Yeah, I mean, we want this film to be seen by as many people as possible. This is, film is a form of resistance. It's the truth. This is a film of the truth. And of course, there is going to be pushback. This is literally combating the narrative that we are seeing over and over and over again be thrown at us from the White House of anti-Semitic or of hateful protesters. Our freedom of speech is compromised right now, to say the least. It is being stripped away from us, and so human beings need to come out and support this film in theaters, because then, as you said, we get more theaters. We want this to be nationwide, as many people to have access to this as possible, and show up. And when I first watched the film, I cried so many times. I left so inspired. I had goosebumps. It's the full spectrum of human emotion. And it really reconnected me to that moment in time that led me to write Hens Hall, that led so many of us to realize that the future of this country rests with the youth. It rests with truth telling. It rests with us telling our own stories of resistance and not letting any false depictions be at the forefront.
And lastly, Macklemore, I really appreciate your time. I just wanted to ask you about something you said in your speech on Saturday. You drew this thread from Gaza to what's happening around the world, from genocide to repression, and even to how the students' encampments were treated. And you called the genocide in Gaza the biggest threat to humanity we have ever faced. And you said, "I want my children to know that Palestinian liberation is our liberation. They are not separate." There's this deep truth in what you said, that standing up for Palestine is about standing up for humanity, because it won't just stay in Gaza. So I'm just curious, as we wrap here, can you speak more to that connection and why this moment demands that kind of global collective response?
I believe in collective liberation. I believe that we are all intrinsically woven, that our spirits are dependent on one another, that if one person is oppressed, until that person is free, we will all be oppressed. I believe that it is our privilege to help other people. That's the part of all of this. It's not like it's actually such a gift to care. It's such a gift to see one another as reflections of ourselves. And when we reflect light, when we reflect love, that is given back to us. And what the people of Palestine have given me, as I've said, is the greatest gift, which is reminding me of what truly matters in this life. And that is to feel heart, that is to see each other as one. And it's tough in our society to really believe that, because we are not conditioned. We are conditioned to see lines. We are conditioned to see people as separate, to break off into different factions and protect ourselves and those that look like us or believe the same things, when in actuality, we are here to be of the utmost service, which is to love all human beings the same. And once you find that, that's the greatest gift. And that is what the last 18 months has given me, in the midst of the most dire consequence of humanity that we have seen, that we are facing. It is given me this moment of looking at my own kids in a different way, looking at the kids that they go to school with in a different way, looking at the kids all over the world in a different way. These are all our brothers and sisters, and we must advocate, we must fight for liberation. Until then, we will not be free, any of us.
Well, Macklemore, I want to thank you so much for being here. Just a reminder, the-encampments.com for tickets to showings around the country. Thank you so much for all that you do.
Thanks, Rania.
You said it there at the end. That was Macklemore, of course, executive producer of the Encampments, Breakthrough Media, Watermelon Pictures collaboration. Anything else you want to say about this film before we get out of here, Rania?
I just want to add that I had the opportunity to watch a screening of it last week that was for media, and it was a really incredible experience. I think a lot of us are feeling I don't want to say the word defeated, but a little disoriented, because after a year and a half of this, it's like more intense than it's ever been. And it can feel quite paralyzing. And one of the best things that you can do in a moment of fear like this and just uncertainty is go be in community. And one way to be in community is to go see this film. I mean, everybody who's watching it is there to be educated and to get to know what happened at the encampments last year. And you won't feel alone. And it's a really moving film. And also Mahmoud Khalil is still in prison, in ICE detention. I shouldn't even say it's prison. He is one of many, a growing number of people who are being disappeared into these ICE facilities for being against genocide. And he's Palestinian himself. And so go learn about his story, go learn about him, and go learn about these encampments, because it was a really important moment in history. And it's not over yet. So for all those reasons, I really hope people go and see this film.
No, absolutely. The-encampments.com. Well, Rania, any final words before we end the show today about things our viewers should know about?
I want to remind everybody to like, subscribe, and share. Liking the show helps boost us in the algorithm. And also, please consider becoming a member of Breakthrough News if you haven't already, for as little as $5 a month. Go to patreon.com/Breakthrough News. You can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch. And most importantly, you can help keep us here at Breakthrough News, an independent media outlet, trying to break through all that mainstream warmongering propaganda. You can help us keep on growing and going.
Yeah. Listen, I like that you're coming up with new stuff. Of course, we really appreciate everyone who joined the show as a guest. We appreciate all you as viewers. We appreciate our ongoing patrons. We appreciate everyone who has made it possible for us to do the movie The Encampments. For myself, for Rania, for the whole Breakthrough News team, we will see you next time.